Soyez bienvenus à Passé Composé avec être. This is going to be helpful in the sense of there are a couple verbs that you can't conjugate in the Passé Composé with avoir. And hopefully you remember how to do that. C'est très simple. It's a three-step process to create this Passé Composé. If you haven't watched the Passé Composé avec avoir, you might want to take a pause and go back and look at that. So step one, when we're creating the Passé Composé, is choosing our auxiliary verb. And as we mentioned in the one with avoir, more likely we're going to be using avoir. Then we need a participle passé. And step three will be a lot of information here. As you already know, that there are 90,000 verbs in French, and a lot of those are going to be conjugated with the verb avoir. However, there are a few that we're going to learn that take only the verb être. And here's 17 that you need to memorize that will be conjugated with the verb être. Devenir, to become, revenir, to come back, monter, to climb up, rester, to stay or to rest, sortir, to exit, venir, come, aller, go, naître, to be born, descendre, to climb down, entrer, to enter, rentrer, come back, tomber, to fall, retourner, to return, arriver, to arrive or be successful at, mourir, to die, et partir, to leave. Now, some people memorize this in a variety of ways. There's something called the house of être that helps students visually see where exactly those verbs will fit. Now, other students I've had have created cool images to help them recall this information. Maybe they're art students, you never know. I've had a student create the bateau d'être. Other things I've seen are like le tour d'être. So they're trying to place in their mind where all these verbs fit. Maybe they try to associate images with them. Other students, they just need to know an acronym called Dr. and Mrs. Vandertramp. And so each of those letters represents one of the verbs. And other students need to know that these are the intransitive verbs. These are verbs that can't take a thing. Like you can't, go and then the thing, or be born thing. Whereas you can give something or eat something, you can't be born something or go something. You go to something. So they tend to be what we call intransitive. Some people like to memorize that these tend to be all motion related. But then again, not all motion verbs require être. Then other students again use the Dr. Mrs. Vandertramp, and others the house of Etre. Some write great stories in English where they describe all of these verbs in one story to help them remember, well, did I use that verb in that story? Then I have to use être. And again, some have done several. In other words, find your way to memorize which verbs are going to use être in the passé composé, because our steps are a little different when we use these verbs. Notice step one is using être. Step two, the participe passé, and I'll show you some irregulars. But also notice step three, être, agreement, oui! So the past participle has to agree with the subject of the sentence, whether it's masculine, feminine, plural, feminine. And so those past participles will look a little different. Well, let's see the past participles without that. So devenir, revenir, venir, all become venu, right? They all have that venu, venu, venu. Monter, rester, sortir, these follow the rules. Aller follows the rules. Naître, to be born, is very different, so you might want to memorize that one. Descendre, R-E turns to you. We know that one's facile. And mort. Just think of Voldemort. Remember? Mort's at the end. He's basically this thing of death. So maybe that will be helpful. Okay, so these are our past participles. We're going to memorize these past participles and that these verbs go with the verb être. We put être first, and then the past participle, and then determine, do they agree? As in, je suis, I would have to use an E on the end because I'm a female. Similarly, if nous sommes, if we were all girls, we would have ES both at the end. If we were a mix of boys and girls, then we would just have the S on the end, not the E. We get that, right? And here's some examples. So, je suis allée au travail. I am a girl. Donc, aller has an E à la fin pour moi. Je suis femme. Je suis entrée dans la salle de classe. I entered into the classroom. Again, je suis formelle. Mes étudiants ne sont pas encore arrivés. Okay, so auxiliary, past participle. Past participle agrees with étudiant. Super. And as we mentioned before, the ne and pas sandwich the auxiliary verb, and the adverb goes between the auxiliary verb and the participe passé. Now, I told you that out of the 9,000 verbs, this 17 verbs are going to be conjugated with the verb être, but we also need être with our reflexives. Do you remember the reflexive? There's a long list of reflexive, and they all have this SSSSSS to help us remember, hey, this is a reflexive verb. So, s'endormir, se réveiller, se lever, se brosser, se doucher, se laver. All of these are going to need être as its auxiliary. But we have one petit problème, and that is, even though they're reflexive and they're going to use the verb être, if there's a direct object in front of the composed past or after, in this case, we are going to have different agreement. So the rule is that if the direct object is in front of the verb, the auxiliary verb, in a composed past, then it has to agree. So for example, j'ai lu l'histoire. I read what? Or who? Right? What? That what is the direct object of our sentence. So the what is the histoire, the story. I read the story is the direct object. I can place that direct object in front of my auxiliary verb, donc je l'ai lu. I read it. C'est super. And thus, because histoire is féminin, I have to have the past participle agree with the direct object because it's in front. Now, this is a super complicated rule that I have seen French people make mistakes on. So if you don't get this 100% correct, that's fine at the moment. But this will affect whether or not our reflexives are going to have to agree or not. So, for example, let's take a look at an example of je me lave les mains. Je me lave quoi? I wash what? The hands. This is a direct object after the verb. Je lave les mains de ma fille. I wash what? The hands of my daughter. So let's look at our, first of all, let's do a quick review. Passé composé is the auxiliary verb past participle, right? And with reflexives, we need être, okay? And if it's not reflexive, like je lave les mains de ma fille, it is not être. So even though it's the verb laver, I'm washing the hands of my daughter, not my own hands. Okay, so then if it's être, oftentimes it does agree. But with reflexives, we do use être, but the agreement is only if the direct object is there in front. So hold on and bear with me. That same rule is going to apply with avoir though. So let's take a look really quick. So if I say je me suis lavé, all of a sudden I'm the direct object. I wash what? Myself. And that agrees. Je me suis lavé les mains. I washed the hands. I washed what? The hands. All of a sudden the hands is the direct object. So I wash the hands of myself. And then the myself part, all of a sudden, even though before it could be the direct object, is now the indirect object. So now I don't agree. Wow. Similarly, j'ai lavé les mains. If I put les mains in front of avoir, then laver would be plural to vêtir les mains. So let's see that with les cheveux. Donc, elle a brossé les cheveux. If I put les cheveux in front, it now has to be plural, or the past participle now has to agree in plural. With the reflexive, I have to use être, not avoir. I have to use être, and if I don't have the direct object there, then all of a sudden it agrees with itself, because that's the direct object. If I'm now brushing the hair of myself, I'm brushing the what? The hair. The hair is now the direct object. Oh, and this should have been plural. Sorry for the typo. That should agree. Oh no, it should be nothing because the direct object afterwards. Excuse-moi, c'est super correct. And if you need a lovely infographic, there are a couple that really explain this phenomenon well. So we can talk to ourselves. Elles se sont parlé. There is no agreement because parler is talking to someone. So it's indirect. It's not directly attached. It's indirect. There's an a blocking it. Elles se sont lavées. They washed what? They washed themselves. So there is agreement. But elles se sont lavées les mains. They washed the hands. They wash their hands is no agreement because they wash their hands of themselves. Ça va? Okay, so in general, what we should be focusing on for être is in the passé composé, these verbs and reflexive are going to take être. These here will definitely agree. And if you're unsure, make it agree. C'est pas le mauvais choix, right? It's not going to be awful. For the most part, it will work. So if you see être and you want to say, hey, I'm going to make it agree, that's okay. And keep working on that direct object thing at another time. C'est très compliqué. In general, we're using the passé composé to narrate these events that are occurring. And even though there's 9,000 verbs in French, only that lovely handful of Dr. and Mrs. Vandertramp is going to take être. So find a way that will help you memorize that. And let me know how that works. And if this helps simplify it and you're ready for this, that's fine too. Just remember choosing your auxiliary, then picking your past participle. If it's avoir, sure, don't agree. Think direct objects are for me for later. And if it's être, yes, make it agree. Again, you can tell yourself direct objects. We'll work on those later. But if you're ready for them now, that's awesome. All right, à tout à l'heure.